Today we're going to be talking about making fabric dyes out of Kalamata olives and black walnuts. I'm Brandon, I'm a gardener at Zinc House, and one of our goals is to find ways to use the leftover farm products in a different way so we get a second life out of them. What's behind me is a Kalamata olive tree. This is the tree that we're going to use to extract the purple dyes for our fabrics today. Usually the olives are harvested in the late fall, and then they're processed and brined, and you could be eating them by now. What's going on now is they're kind of late in the season, so the color has kind of condensed in them, and they're not good for eating anymore. So this is just a waste product that we would usually just rake away. So what we're gonna do is process them in a different way and make our fabric dyes. Once we've harvested the olives from the tree, the next step is to process them. To get the color to come out of the olive more, what we usually do is take a knife and make a few cuts in the skin and throw them in the jar. It's a process that takes a long time, but it's worth it because you get so much more color out of the olive that way. This is the color that the olives are gonna make us. It's like a golden amethyst purple, which is a pretty cool color. Another thing that we can make dye out of is black walnuts. So these are black walnuts that fell out of the tree on the last storm, and so I went and gathered and picked them up. And with a black walnut, it's a little bit easier because there's no oil in the walnut. So what you do is you just fill it full of water and you cook it for a day. For the olives, there's a little bit more of a process because we have to actually extract the fat because we don't want the fat to absorb into our silks and start staining our fabric that way. So this is the process over here of extracting the color from the olive. What I do is once I get a full jar of olives that have been cut, I fill it about half full of vinegar and then the rest of water. Then we take it, we cook it over a wood-burning stove for a day in this jar, and we end up with a larger dye vat like this. And if you look into here, you can see there's two colors of purple here. One is this like deep purple that we're going for. That's all the water and vinegar with a color that's been extracted. And then there's a layer of fat. It's the meaty part of the olive. All of that will float to the top. So if you let it settle for a day or so, you can siphon out the liquid from the bottom and have a dye that is just water and no fat. And then you can put it into a jar, dip one of your fabrics into the jar and leave it on heat overnight or for a few hours. And then you pull out a beautiful dyed scarf. So when we have the raw scarves, we soak them and wash them in vinegar just to get any extra oil out of the scarf and to clean it with a natural cleaner. The goal is to get the scarf in the dye vat without any air bubbles. So I usually pick it up on a diagonal. Be careful not to touch it too much with your oily fingers. And then you slowly dip it into your dye. And if you do it on an angle, the idea is the air bubbles kind of come up as you go down. And if you can get it entirely in the vat without any air bubbles, then you'll get a really smooth finish. It's a little bit of a slow process getting it down there, but it's worth it to take your time in this step to have a more solid looking color in the end. Once the silk is in and completely submerged and you don't see any air bubbles, I put the lid on lightly and then put it on the wood stove or put it somewhere in heat. You could probably even set it out in the sun if it's a warm day and use like solar heat to heat up your dye vat, like sun tea. And then the longer you leave it sitting in this dye, the richer your color is gonna be. This has been left in overnight. You let it soak up the juice. The more heat you give it, the more intense the color is gonna be, but you don't want it too hot that you shrink your material. You can either do it over a wood-burning stove or on like really low on a stove in a stock pot. I've been using these mason jars and just putting them on the stove because it's already heating the house. So this is just a way to use that energy again. You get it out and then you rinse it in cold water to set the color. Some of the color will come out when you do this, but the idea is a lot of it stays in and you get a beautiful colored scarf. What I'm doing now is adding water to the black walnuts. We're gonna cook this over low heat for 12 to 24 hours and extract the black dye from the walnut husk. All right, so this is an example of the black walnut dye. You get a really deep, rich color with black walnut, and you don't need to cook it as long as the Kalamata to get that color. The tannins in the black walnut really just make it absorb into the fabric and stick really well.